Hello, everyone. Welcome back to LTV Talks. Today, we are going to explore a theme that's really been on my mind for quite some time, which is what can brands actually learn from content creators? As I recently heard, brand is a gut feeling that a customer has about you, and content is really at the forefront of how your brand interacts with your users. And if you think about it, like creators like Ali Abdaal, who the guest has actually worked with, have millions of followers who come back and consume their content week after week. They don't rely on discounts, they don't spam push notifications, and they've really like sort of seem to figure out how to keep people engaged at scale. And my guest today, Ines Lee, is the perfect person to actually dig into this. She's an Oxford trained economist who actually very interestingly pivoted to from academia to creator economy, and she's been the head of content previously for Ali Abdal, who a lot of you might know, but she's also helped scale a lot of other best-selling authors like Nirayal, and she's worked with Zain Kahn, so a lot of well-known people in the industry. And yeah, Ines, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's great to be here. And yeah, excited to speak to you. I've already learned a lot from you about, life cycle marketing and CRMs, which, I only know from a very surface level. So yeah, it'll be great to chat about this and where the two worlds intersect.
Yeah, 100%. This is like this first time that we have someone on the episode who is not really working in the growth world, in the growth marketing space. But I honestly think like there's so much to learn from content creation world and how it translates to maybe brands. Yeah, and building that loyalty at scale, but then also like how to develop scalable systems, because I imagine like people like who are very well known content creators can't do this, can't just think of new ideas every day, which is
Mm,
the frequency of stuff that they post about. So I'm sure like they have like this, they've figured out a way to scale content systems, which I'd
yeah.
love to dive deeper into. But also, I read a lot of your thesis work. So you're actually Dr. Ines Lee, I should say.
Yeah.
And I read a lot about your research, which was also very interesting.
Wow, that's a
Um,
first. Thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah.
Feels like a
Uh,
distant past now. Yeah.
yeah, and I would love to know like how does an economist find themselves now, into the content world?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've always, so my background is in academia, as you mentioned. So, did the very traditional path of doing a doctorate and then a postdoc, and then spent 1 year as a tenure track lecturer, which is the name for an assistant professor in the UK. But always been very interested in the kind of more creator and creative space. But the narrative kind of, as I was growing up, is, it's very difficult to make a living in the creative space. And it was, just kind of by coincidence. It was during the pandemic, really, when I had a bit more time at home. And at the time, I was a postdoctoral researcher, so had a bit of a more free time compared
Hmm.
to during the PhD, and started applying to a few more freelance writing gigs. And yes, started doing a bit more of my own writing, and then stumbled on this job ad where Ali Abdal, the creator you spoke about, was hiring for content writers. And at the time, it was probably one of my first times hearing the role title content writer, and I didn't fully understand what it meant. But like his channel had really popped up during the pandemic, and I felt like, oh, I'm somewhat familiar with what this guy sounds like on YouTube. I think I can have a quick go at this trial task, which was writing a script in his tone of voice. So yeah, and that was kind of my first entry into that world of the creator economy. And yeah, it was really, a really fantastic place to learn and have my first exposure to that world. Yeah, very much like you said. I think when I entered, I had no clue that behind this one person on camera is, a team who can help like formalize the systems, make sure that, there's kind of an operation behind the creative side.
Hmm.
Because I think when I went in, I kind of thought, creativity is this thing that, you sit down and you have an idea, and, things just flow from you. But yeah, I think it's not until working with Ali where I really saw how do you create that bridge between, I guess what might conceive as pure creativity and more the business and the operation side. And I think when you manage to find a way to bridge those two things, that's when you can really, feel like you can consistently create, hopefully without burning out, and hopefully while still consistently providing value. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a long story of how that happened.
Yeah, and sorry to make you repeat that. I've heard about this story on a lot of other podcast episodes that you've done.
Yeah.
So I know it might be repetitive, but one thing that
No.
I noticed that you hadn't answered, and I'd be curious to know, is why did someone like him hire you? Like, what do you think you were good at that? Because I mean, I would imagine like a lot of people would have wanted to work with him in that role.
Yeah.
So, was it your writing style? Like, what did you get about content even that early on without having worked in content that you think resonated with the team, and like, why did they decide to work with you?
That's a good question. And I think, yeah, probably most accurate to ask him. I think from what you're right that it was actually a surprisingly competitive role. And there are thousands of applications um, for these roles with creators that a lot of people admire. But I would say from my conversations with Ali, the thing that he valued, I think, was my ability to kind of synthesize different information sources and kind of distill it in a way that's hopefully accessible to a broader audience. And Ali, he has a medical background, and so making sure that the content we provide is as evidence based as possible, as backed up by research and references is important. And to be more specific, actually, the trial task to get to that job and to jump through the hoops was actually a book summary video
Mhm.
of one of Adam Grant's books. And so, the question then is like, oh, how do you distill this 350-page book into a 10-minute YouTube video? And I think that is perhaps where there's a bit of an overlap in terms of like the economic background training and where the skill set is sorry. What I mean is, in academia, you got to be able to figure out, okay, there are these 100 different sources saying these different things. What am I trying to answer and what am I trying to convey? And yeah, I think I've been able to use that skill in the creator world when creating, especially I think long form content. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think that might be his answer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that's, I asked that because that's, I feel like that's pretty much also what we do in lifecycle marketing, right? Like you
Yeah.
have this brand that you're working for, and of course there are other nuances, like when you have like the ability to target people based on how they have interacted with the brand so far, which I guess a YouTube creator doesn't have to, like, because they would have to publish it for everyone. It's not like, okay, because you've sort of watched five of my content and these pieces, I'm going to personalize what I send to you or talk about.
Yeah.
We can do that much more effectively, but the challenge is the same, right? Like, how do you figure out what's relevant to these audience that you're sending to? And I'm just wondering, like, what's your process of doing that, not in a like a high level. If you look back at your work, like, what do you think is required to get to that distillation, right? Like, what did you answer when you were looking at that 350-page book?
Mm.
What process did you go through, broadly speaking, to get to a summary, right? Like, what were you looking at?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I feel like there are so many different pieces there that you mentioned. I so agree with you. Like, if you break it down, the challenge of a YouTuber with 2 million subscribers and an app with 2 million monthly active users, it seems different, but fundamentally, they're trying to keep people coming back week after week or day after day and still find value in the thing. Yeah, so that's actually such an interesting comparison. And you also mentioned the point that in many ways, apps have a lot more, or products, or a lifecycle marketer or a CRM person would have a lot more personal data about the user compared to a content creator, and might be able to use that like first, user data to customize the content and the messaging at a level that's way more granular than a content creator who's more kind of building a parasocial relationship with lots of people, compared to hopefully a more personalized angle that you might be able to do with more personal data. But yeah, going back to your question of like, how does that process of distillation happen? And using the example of the script, I would say that the first thing is really finding like the angle, the kind of problem statement that you envision the user to have. So, for example, even with this Adam Grant book, there's so many things that one could talk about. Then the question then becomes, from the creator's perspective or the brand's perspective, what is the problem that the user or the audience that you're speaking to most resonates with? And therefore, like, what angle should I approach that thing from? Maybe we could be a little bit more specific. So for, say that the book is about, I don't know, procrastination or something. There's so many things within procrastination that one could talk about. And, rather than framing procrastination as a very broad thing of like me saying I'm going to do something but not doing it, can you be more specific in terms of framing the problem in a way that somebody would really feel seen by? So for example, breaking it down into procrastination being, an emotional problem, and using a contrarian take on, that problem statement. And then from then on, I feel like once you have that through line of like, oh, I want to approach it from that angle, it then becomes a lot more easy to find the building blocks of how do I tackle that problem. And I think at that point, you can then kind of come up with the framework with which you want to address that problem, and then kind of slot in the different content chunks within that framework. Don't know if that
Lovely.
makes sense, but yeah.
I think it does. Like, for example, I was just thinking, like, if I would work with a meditation app,
Yeah.
the problem statement, or maybe the benefit is that, okay, on the surface, you are just providing a service where people can come and meditate and feel more calm and peaceful. But then the problem statement could vary a lot, right? Like, some people might be just stressed overall, with the shorter term happenings in their life. There could be multiple problem statements for using a meditation app.
Yes.
um, and then we as marketeers, we also do something similar, but we don't have long form content, right? We write an email or a push notification or whatever. And if we don't speak to that use case, or if we don't try which use case resonates with which users, it's the same problem we'd have, right? Like, if we also need to drill down like the use case almost, right?
Yeah.
And that's how, whenever I am working on this project, and I'd love to know your take on this process, by the way, is like, I would start breaking it down into personas of like, hey, so that we have like these 5 type of people. One is just like, maybe they're new to meditation and they just heard about it on a podcast that you should do it for your well-being, but you're not necessarily stressed. You just want to be mentally calm. Whereas otherwise, you have a very identified problem where you are already stressed and you know that meditation exists, and you come in, or you might be an expert meditator. I don't know. And then that's how I would break down, like, that would be my first step of trying to understand what my audience's problem statement is, or like what their use case or persona is. How would you go about it? Like, let's say if I put you in a room with a meditation app today,
Yeah.
and they were like, okay, we need pieces of content that would be very highly relevant,
Yeah.
almost like a take Headspace for as an example.
Yeah.
How would you break it down, and how would you start?
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear about your process of breaking it down into 5 different personas, because yeah, there's definitely overlaps, most of the creators I work with, and brands brands in the sense of more startups rather than a personality led creator business. One of the first things we definitely do is like map out, the customer profile and who we think we're speaking to, and being so specific to the extent of like, hey, the person is, Alice, a 23-year-old medical student who's not sure if she actually wants to be a doctor or not.
Mm.
Being specific to that level, which sounds like there's some parallels with your Headspace persona examples. But yes, going back to your question of, okay, so suppose we're put in a room with an app founder and we're asked to tackle this problem of like, how do we come up with content? I think I would start at a similar place to you of thinking about, okay, so maybe even before that, I think I would have this think about, okay, what is the goal / job to be done of that product? And really defining the goal of the product and service. And the reason why I say that, I think, is like the content system very much depends on what that job to be done is. So for example, in the case of Headspace, it would be, the job is to help people, find peace and calm in their lives through meditation, for something like, I don't know, runner is, to become a, whatever the problem
Mhm.
statement is, to become a proficient marathon runner, or Duolingo would be to become proficient in the language. And I think, yeah, actually, I'll be curious to get your take on this. I guess that my take is that there are probably different buckets for different products, right? So there are a lot of products that are kind of more habit forming or behavior change oriented. So things like Headspace, Strava, Duolingo would probably fall under that. And
Hmm.
then I think there are another bucket that's kind of more collaboration, productivity tools related. So things like Figma, Notion, Asana would probably fall under that.
Hmm.
And then another bucket would be, and I'm just spieling here, so please
Yeah.
intervene if it's wrong. But another bucket I think would be kind of media slash subscription products. So things like Audible, Blinkist, where the job to be done there is almost acting as a curator for people to, find high quality sources of information and have an information diet that they feel like is really enriching them. Yeah, so I'm sure the list is endless, but the reason why I bring that up is like, I guess it's really important as a first step to figure out where your product or your app lands in the spectrum of different
Hmm.
buckets. And in a similar way, I think the equivalent for a content creator is, that we use the word niche a lot, but the equivalent would be figuring out what your niche is, whether that's, productivity, and within productivity, what is that? If it's in, lifestyle, what aspect of lifestyle are you talking about? So yeah, I think a first step would be kind of figuring out that goal slash job to be done. Then I think I would dive into what you were saying of figuring out the personas of
Hmm.
those different people. And that might range from like, very problem aware of, having tried different meditation apps, but then figuring out it doesn't quite work for them and then landing with Headspace versus, you know, complete beginner in meditation and, really looking for the hand holding.
Right.
Then I think third thing potentially would be to kind of map out what is the key actions you're looking for from the user so that they have like the highest success rate and that they derive the most value from the product. And going back to the meditation example, I guess there the keystone action would be, in an ideal world, we want this person to meditate 10 minutes a day. For Audible, it would be like, oh, I want you to listen to an audiobook, at least once a month. Duolingo would be, I don't know, 10 minutes Mandarin a day, or
Hmm.
whatever, yeah, the keystone action is. And then I think, given that now you know, okay, what the goal is, what are the personas, what is the keystone action, which might differ, right, depending on the person. Like a beginner, maybe you only want them to meditate 3 times a week versus an advanced person who you want it to do it daily. I think then it's like, then you can start putting together um, the content system, by which I think that would include what is the cadence of content you want to put out, like what is the cadence of the push notifications, the emails, etc. And that's informed by the keystone action, because if you want them to meditate every day, then it wouldn't make sense to only have one push notification a week.
Hmm.
And actually, I have a related question here for you, because I noticed that, apps like, products like Notion or Figma, I feel like I barely hear from them
Yeah.
unless there's an email notification about an update. So side note there, but I guess, yeah, so I think that then informs the calendar, like how frequently you want to message people. And then kind of downstream of that as well, it allows you to figure out, what is the voice, because for a meditation app, it makes a lot of sense that the voice would be something kind of like, you want to sound like a friendly coach, versus if you were, a media subscription app, maybe it makes more sense to sound a bit more authoritative, like you're a curator who's like synthesized all this information. Um, yeah, I think those are like the fundamental blocks.
And
Yeah,
there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, I think like this is amazing that how you described the different types of industries, because and that was my question to you as well, right? Like
yeah,
when it comes to like Figma or Notion or tools that are utility driven, I was just wondering like how important it is for them to have a voice, like because I was just
yeah,
thinking like, okay, if I had to think Headspace as a person, I might have an impression of who that person might be, whereas if I think of Notion, I also have a feeling that it's someone modern, someone friendly,
yeah.
collaboration, but I don't necessarily feel that strongly about that brand, right? Like, so do you think for utility apps it's also important to have a voice? And again, right, like if we go back to this this world of content, how important it is for you to have a voice, like a voice that speaks to a tone of voice rather, right? Like, so I could speak to the same problem, let's say productivity, but I could speak like a Tim Ferriss. I could speak like a who are other productivity. Ali Abdaal probably is another
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
productivity.
yeah.
So there are and he maybe approaches it in a different way, and Tim approaches it in a
Yeah,
different way. And it's the same with brands, right? Like Ryanair speaks to a very different audience versus a Lufthansa
yeah,
or versus an even EasyJet.
yeah.
And I feel like it's very important to have that tone of voice as a brand.
Right.
But I'd be curious to know, like, do you think it's important? And if so, like, how does someone develop that voice? If
Yeah,
we forget about the users, how do I develop my voice as a brand?
yeah.
Yeah, just I know there are a lot of questions there, but I'm just wondering, like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, lots of questions about. Actually, before we try to unpack that, I would be curious to hear because I also feel like it's such a subjective thing, like voice, and your thing of your statement just now of when I imagine headspace, I have a very strong image of a person, and I think same as you, and I think the reason for that is like because I hear is his name Andy, like because
Yeah, I think
yeah,
so.
because I hear his voice when I think of headspace.
Yes.
So I'd be curious to hear, like, what do you picture when you imagine Notion and like Ryanair, and because I'm curious to hear whether
Yeah.
people form the same opinions.
Yeah, for Ryanair, I can say much more than I can about Notion because I was looking at their posts recently, and they're like this mean person who really only cares about making things cheap for you. And even if you look at their social media posts and like their comments, you
Yeah,
will very quickly see that people would complain like, "Hey, this is a big line that I saw in front of Ryanair today," or whatever, right?
yeah,
And they would post like, okay, yeah, if you're looking for cheap tickets, you just pay the price, or something like that. So they're
yeah,
acting like, and I think people, and that's their voice, when I think about it, because it's such a good value. It's like, listen, we are going to provide cheap tickets to you, but you might have to, think about it might come at a cost of inconvenience or whatever, and we are okay with that. You should be okay with it too.
yes,
We are not aiming to be a Lufthansa. Yeah, and so I think like, and that works in their favor. And someone also told me about McDonald's, like how if imagine if you would go to McDonald's for a dinner date, on your first anniversary with your
yeah,
wife. Um, and they were like, yeah, but McDonald's wouldn't necessarily come and serve you, especially
yeah,
because their tone of voice is just not that. It's like, listen, come get quick food, cheap food, good food, and then go, right? Like that's their
yeah,
brand positioning, tone of voice, whatever it might be. Although I don't have a clear voice for Blinkist, for example. I when I think of Blinkist, I'm not thinking about a specific characteristics, and that's also common for a lot of other brands that I interact with. That I don't see a voice or like a person or like this identity, versus
yeah.
brands that have Duolingo has a strong identity, right?
Right, right. That's that. Yeah, those are really great points. I totally agree with you that Ryanair, it's almost like they've done they were shamelessly budget
Hmm.
friendly really well and like almost making that the thing that people make fun of an asset. I totally agree. I love their Instagram page. It's very funny. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so it sounds like actually when you do, because I feel like I have a similar opinion as you as the things you've described. And so extrapolating that, it seems like, when you do the branding and the voice right, different customers would walk away with the same image. Yeah, if I had so to your question of is it important? I feel like yes, because loyalty comes from kind of understanding. But I think trust and loyalty inevitably is downstream, upstream, whatever
Mm-hmm.
direction it is, from knowing who is talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are a lot of ways to get to that. And I think that's where it's interesting for brands, because I think I went into the creator space definitely thinking like voice and brand comes from a person and it has to be associated with a person because, that's where voice comes from. But I actually think that's a misconception on my part because if done well, I feel like voice is something that can be detached from a person and can be replicated with the same systems precisely through the things you spoke about. And I think if we had to break it down, one way of getting a voice is associating it with a person and a specific way that they talk, sentence structure, accent, cadence, and so on. But another way would be through some kind of character or mascot, like
Mm.
the Duolingo green owl or something. A third way would be, sorry, so first way is like through a person. And if I had to put, an example of product, maybe Headspace would be a good product as an example because we think of, or we hear Andy's voice quite
Mm.
literally. Then the second would be character/mascot, where you have a fictional character embodying that brand. So the Duolingo owl might be one example. And to some extent, perhaps even the notion, the images that we picture,
Yeah.
maybe is one example of them doing that. Although maybe that's less clear because I don't recall any instances where I see that character speaking.
Mm.
And then I think a third one would be just going with a kind of a house style or a brand style. Sorry, that's a bit vague. Let's say it's a house style. And I think a really good example of this is like The Economist magazine. And what I mean by this is for as long as they've existed, which I presume is quite long, they don't do bylines, right? And so you don't ever see, even though they have the same sections of the magazine, for the past few decades, you never see like the journalist's name, but they do have, again, characters for specific sections. So like the finance section is always, I think, I don't know, or the US column is always like Lexington or something like that. So they have like characters associated with that. But at the same time, I feel like they have a very strong brand. When I think of The Economist, I can't picture a specific person, but I do think of somebody who's like intelligent, who's worldly, albeit maybe looking at it from a Western lens. But there is a very consistent style that they've managed to carry across through all of the issues that they've published, despite there not being, one person behind the magazine. And then I would say the final, perhaps, there's more, but I would say the last thing that comes to mind in terms of methods of building a voice would be some kind of founder-led thing, where
Mm.
perhaps has some overlap with the first approach of there being a person. So an example again would be Notion, where when I do get emails, I do see Ivan's name on it.
Mm.
And when that happens, I do associate that person with the brand. So yeah, I would say those are like the different approaches within the product space that comes to mind when it comes to figuring out your brand and tone of voice.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And I think there are a lot of parallels between like this whole not only content creator and brands. And I think like these are all the things in between. Like, how do you
Yes.
almost personify your brand? And it could be a mascot, but it doesn't have to be like what we spoke about with Ryanair. I think it's just like all their activities are geared towards that personality, even if you don't have a person in mind. It's like you
Yeah.
know what that brand stands for,
Yeah.
and it's a lot harder to do in real life. I whenever I work with brands, this is like a request I always have. It's like, listen, who are we, like what's our voice? And it's
Yeah.
so hard to find even brands with millions of users and doing really well. They haven't necessarily done that exercise. And I think like um a learning is like, it is, at least as consumers, we see that it's super relevant.
Mm,
You associate with it much more strongly, and you're much more, do you think having that voice, and again, like this might be an easy question, but I think having that voice does encourage loyalty and engagement, right? Like, because I know whenever I think of savings, I
mm,
might open Ryanair and not EasyJet just because of that extra enforcement from all their content.
right.
And I think it plays a role. I don't have a quantitative way to answer it, but like,
Yeah.
in the content creator space, have you seen any parallels between that? Like, do you see like content creators who have a strong voice, who have a strong personality, versus content creators who might be a bit more generic? Like, do you see any differences in terms of, or what's your opinion on like, does that foster loyalty on the long term?
Oh, yeah. I think, yeah, I probably hold a similar view as you. Like gut instinct is like definitely yes, but I also
Hmm.
don't have the data to back it up. Like, but I totally get your point with the Ryanair thing. And I would even go so far to say is like, even though, going back to our different ways of like building voice, even though, Ryanair doesn't have a mascot, or like a character, I feel like they are trying to move towards that direction when they have like, the googly eyes on the plane.
Mm.
So there is like a little bit of, they're trying to personify something that is, like an inanimate object. And so
Mm.
I feel like they are trying to do those little bits. But yeah, going back to your question, I think, yeah, I mean, gut instinct, yeah, again, no data to prove this, but I definitely think there is something about, when you feel like there's a person behind something, you're more likely to buy from them. And it's become a little bit of the cliche now of like,
Yeah.
people don't buy from brands, or they buy from people, whatever that statement is. So I think there must be something behind that. And
Mm.
so maybe it's something you can test an A/B test, yeah, and get the data. Yeah.
100%. A common thing for like if we draw that to just for the audience who's like in life cycle marketers,
Yeah.
the type of test that I have done before and which I found very interesting is we would take like different tone of voices. For example,
Interesting.
with Lifesum, which is a health and fitness app, and you log your meals and it helps you stay fit and achieve your health goals. One thing we tried was like what brings users back, which tone of voice is the most effective to bringing these people who haven't done anything in the app for like let's say 2 3 months and have probably forgotten about it, what tone of voice brings them back. And what
Interesting.
we found was, and we tested a bunch of things, right? Like there was motivation in terms of like listen, you're not going to achieve your goals if you don't log, so it was a bit more aggressive. And then there were tone of voice which was much more mentally aware, like empathetic. It was like, listen, we understand things can get tough, but it only takes one thing to come back. And then we tested like these 7 8 buckets of tone of voices, and I thought like that exercise is probably the way you define your
Wow.
brand voice in the lifecycle marketing world, because you can test at scale and you get
Yeah.
like instant response, and then you build that out across different user life cycles.
What did you guys find
We found
from that
empathetic
exercise?
was the best one, which was
Okay.
just like, and it was funny because it said nothing about meal logging. It didn't say anything about achieving your health goals. It was
Wow.
like feeling underwhelmed.
Yeah.
Just take 3 deep breaths and you will get there. And whenever you're ready, start logging again or something along that lines.
Wow.
And I thought
That
that
does.
was crazy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes me wonder, like in the lifecycle marketing world, do you guys let the voice be? So that's a really good example of how like the user kind of informs the voice. And I even think, for sorry, I'm bundling my questions here. But my question was basically two parts. One is like, do you ever allow the users to customize their voices? So for example, like would it be possible for one person it's more empathetic that works and the other person more authoritative and they can customize it? Or
This is amazing because I always have thought about it. I haven't seen anyone do it, but there is one app which you should definitely try, and
mhm.
it's called Carrot.
Carrot. Okay.
It's a weather app, and it's amazing. So in the onboarding, they ask you like, how do you want to be spoken to, and
Oh,
you
wow.
can choose like thrash me versus like be very gentle and nice and always like this humble person. And they have like bunch of personalities, and I took the one that was the most extreme. So whenever I open the app, it announces the weather um, on that voice. So it will be like it's a bad day. Just don't get out of bed and just stay. Like things like that, and it's
Yeah.
super funny. That's the only example that comes to mind where someone has asked me.
Uh,
But if you think about it, like Duolingo is doing something similar with Lily and all these other characters.
right.
Like
Yes.
Lily is sarcastic and it has its own tone of voice. And
Yes.
now they're sending notifications as Lily. So they are also playing around with which characters resonate with you and which tone of voice probably resonates with you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I think it is very bi-directional, I think, in comparison to the creator space, because in many ways as well, I think my image of Notion is more formed. Sorry, the impression I get of Notion, I think I almost think of the users rather than the brand first. So like when I picture those animated black and white characters, I imagine it's almost like I'm putting the users within those animations. And I
Mm.
think of like, a professional kind of Gen Z slash millennial age bracket, working in tech, potentially has a remote job. And it's almost like when I think of the brand, I think of the users. And I wonder if that's quite unique in your space where
Mm.
yeah, that's more common compared to the content world where it's more directed from one side.
I would say that there are brands that do it well.
Yeah.
Apart from the brands that we spoke about, I think like I recently downloaded, with one of the clients we were using Post Hog,
Oh, yeah.
which is just like another tool, and their emails had like a very clear voice, and it was very funny, and you could totally see like it being a very transparent and brand. And so I
Yeah.
thought like there are few examples of companies that do it well, but at least the way lifecycle marketing works right now for most of the brands, we don't necessarily define that, right? Like, so even with that lifetime example that I told you about, we tested it on that bunch of users, but then we didn't develop that into a scalable system that is reflected across the blog, across all our content, all our material, right? And I think that's maybe another section of what I'd love your opinion on is like once you've defined that voice and once you've defined that brand identity,
Yeah.
how do you take that and then scale it, right? And maybe content creators are good at doing that, or better than a typical consumer subscription app. But how do you then make it into a scalable system? And a good proxy question for that is like I think I sent this to you before as well, which is like how do you onboard a new content writer on the team, right? Like,
Right.
so how do people scale this into like maintaining authenticity while you are scaling?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very relevant question. Okay, so let's take a step back. So I guess when we say like scaling voice, my understanding of that is I want to make sure that I can have a team of 20 people, and if 20 people are in charge of writing 200 different emails, they all sound similar rather than 20 different unique voices, right? And in particular, they sound the way that we've just tested is most effective for our users. In the case of Lifesum, empathetic, motivational, like a friend and a coach rather than, a critic or a harsh teacher. So for me, the scaling piece, the start of it really boils down to, well, how do you educate, the 20 people on your team to really understand and internalize the way that you want to sound. This might sound a little bit dry and boring, but it boils down to being able to document and SOPify the voice, right? In the same way that you would create SOP for, I don't know, scheduling an email or something.
Mm.
Um, and then the question then becomes, okay, what are the components within that SOP or that brand voice guideline? Which I think, with the creators I work with, one of the first things we want to do is build that brand voice guideline. And this might be, a 10-page PDF where we walk through what are the general guidelines and principles for sounding like this person. And I would think about breaking down that document into several parts. I think the beginning is just the understanding of what that persona you want to lead with is. And that might include things like, okay, what is your core personality? In the case of Headspace, it's I want to come across like a friendly, meditation coach who, is also has a vibe of a therapist who knows who understands what's going on with you. And then you can like start drilling down even more, using specific adjectives and a number associated with that adjective to describe how strong you are on that dimension. So like, warmth, you might be super high on for the Headspace personality. The word authority may be fairly low. The word playful, maybe medium, things like that, and start like drilling down into it more. So that's one core piece of like defining what is that personality. The second bit I would say is kind of word choice and preferred fit phrases. And the fancy word here is like, okay, what is your like lexical toolkit? So what's an example here? Yeah, like lexicon, or yeah, so lexical toolkit. Yeah. So examples here would be like, what are some of the phrases we don't want to use? So maybe, okay, Headspace, we never want to use the phrase unlock your true potential on a push notification or something because it sounds cliche.
Right.
Or maybe like, do we use the word session, or do we use streak, or do we use, start, or do we use, kickstart? So these things to like drill down what is the way this specific persona speaks? And it can literally be just like a list of like, hey, these are the banned words. These are the words that we use quite often. And so it makes it very clear to whoever's writing that we want to definitely avoid these words, or we want these words to appear quite often. And then the final bit of an additional bit would be to think about kind of the formatting, the syntax, the rhythm. So things, for example, things like, how do you write your numbers? How do you do times? What is the average sentence length? Things like that. Do you use emojis? What kind of punctuation do you avoid or use quite often? So more like technical things like that to make sure it's quite consistent across different users. And then in addition to that, what I would think about then is like, how does that translate across the different content formats you have? So in the creator space, inevitably the way you write a LinkedIn post or an X post is going to be different to the way you write a blog, just by the fact that, word count is going to be different. And the way, a hook needs to sound on LinkedIn is going to be different to the way it can sound in a blog title. So then translating that to your world, where I guess the core content pieces would be push notifications, emails, and
Also like
in-app.
Facebook ads.
Okay, right.
So all of that would come into this, maybe even blogs or articles on your website, or
Got you.
the way you reply to your reviews on the App Store, the ways
Yeah.
you comment on other people's posts, tagging you, all
Oh,
of that,
wow.
right?
Okay. Okay, that's a lot. Yeah, yeah. So then having examples for all of those, like how does all of those, like the theoretical stuff, we more, I guess, more abstract things we spoke about, the personality, the word choice, punctuation, emojis, etc. How does that translate into actual examples of the most common content formats? And I always find here providing like do's, like this is a good example, is as important. Sorry, providing as this isn't the thing to avoid is as important as like here's the thing to do. Because I think, yeah, I personally learn a lot from like counter examples. And when I first started working with Ali, because I'd come from the academia space, there were so many things that I'd picked up that maybe sound a little bit too formal and not casual enough for the audience that he was speaking to. And I remember lots of instances where it was super helpful when we'd just sit down together and he'd be like, I prefer the word but rather than however. And, I just never even thought about the contrast between those two words. And so things like that, I think being able to build those examples into this SOP for your brand voice would be super helpful for any writers that you're onboarding and trying to scale the voice. And I would say like final thing is like, how do you, and I wrestle with this a bit, how do we keep that freshness and that feeling of like, I'm really just speaking to you rather than sounding like a robot who's followed this 10-page PDF of what I should sound like. And I think, I hope it's not I hope it's a lot of, sorry, what I'm trying to say is I hope a brand voice guideline that's written well would still give a writer a lot of scope to incorporate that intuition and that freedom, because the goal isn't to sound like a robot, but it's just to give you like the guardrails on a bowling alley to know, okay, what are the things we want to avoid and not go into the drain, but still be able to do the thing you want.
100%. And as you were saying, I was like, this would be such a cool GPT to build in-house,
Yeah.
and then just train it on like these guardrails and then let it go wild with those guardrails.
Yes.
And then you could like probably AI helps in scaling that much more effectively
Yes.
now than ever. But there's also like this, one thing that I have been playing with is trying to, because I can't articulate taste and which words I should use, which words I shouldn't use, and things like that. And again, AI is so good at that.
Yeah.
So one thing I'm doing now is there's this website that it's like a side project that I created called pushwall.me, where I collect all these push notifications that all these other brands are sending on a daily basis. And one way I'm using it now, which is very interesting, and I don't have a very clear definition of what I'm doing, but I'm trying it out, is that I take all these push notifications from a brand over the last 7 days, and then I add that to ChatGPT and I ask them to describe their taste, tone of voice, what would
I love
they
that.
say, not say, things like that.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting exercise because that gives me so much more context into, yeah, this brand is someone who might say this or who might not say that. and it can
Wow.
be like a good sparring partner to define that tone of voice. If if you didn't have a brand team, that's how I would do it probably.
Yeah. That's super cool. Wait, a pushwool.me, did you say?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna
Check it
check it
out.
out.
It's a
That's
it's a
super
very
cool.
scrappy website, so bear with it. But you can get like a lot of notifications from like there are around 10,000 notifications already from
Wow.
50 apps or so.
Wow.
And yeah, it's very interesting.
Have you shared it? Have you shared it with like your, okay. I love
Just
that.
2 days ago, just 2 days ago.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's super cool. I love those things where people like collect different, yeah, inspiration from different places. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the next step that I'm trying to like formulate is also like how does that then enable lifecycle marketers to define their own tone of voice, and maybe like when they are in these conversations, it would enable them to like say, listen, actually, this is what our brand says, and this is what our
Yes.
brand doesn't say, and then test their way out of it or into a brand tone of voice.
Yeah.
And another example that you were just talking about, like I was just pulling up Duolingo's tone of voice. So for also other people like who haven't come across it, I think Duolingo and Vice, both of them have like such great tone of voice. And exactly to your point, like they have something in there which says, if when learners stumble, we support them. This is the time for friendly, helpful language, but don't overdo it. And then they give examples like if that happens, we say not quite correct, try again instead of incorrect. And then they say we should say, oh no, you're out of health. Want to ask a friend for a refill, versus we are very sorry, but you don't have any health left. Hopefully, a friend will share some health with you. And that's how they're defining, like they help you
Yeah.
define the language you want to speak, which was also
Yeah.
very interesting, right?
That is so interesting. I think like if I were an outsider to this world, I would probably think like, oh, like how on earth would that make a difference? And I think but I think it so makes sense because if you're interacting with the app, 3 times a day through these push notifications, all of these little things like build up to form your pretty concrete impression of this brand.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so yeah, I do think it's like all of these tiny little things really really accumulate. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like that's what also makes like a job of lifecycle marketer much more interesting is to play around with this. And I think
Mm,
like right now is a very good time to be getting into like content and working with people like yourself who are good at defining that tone of voice and that system, because I think like if you can define that once, now you have many more ways to scale it with AI and use that across your teams and across your marketing channels, versus maybe 5 years ago when you would have to train each and individual team member um, on
yeah.
your tone of voice and things like that.
Yeah, so true. So true. Yeah, no, it's definitely a super interest. I mean, my yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot from you about, CRM marketing, life cycle marketing, and I feel like yeah, it's kind of such an integral part, between marketing and product. And it's almost like you're bridging all of that, through content, through data, through tech, and yeah, it feels like there's a lot to play with, and when done well, is super super powerful.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
100%. Um, yeah, that's great. And Ines, I'd love to know what you're working on right now. How are you helping brands and creators, and like what's your work mode right now? What are you
Yeah.
offering to brands and creators maybe?
Yeah. So very broadly, I would say I offer a kind of a head of content service to brands and creators. And right now I work with mainly creators as well as some brands who are basically trying to figure out, okay, how do we use content, and in particular content across different stages of the funnel to achieve the business goals that we've set for ourselves. So yeah, that's very broadly what I do. And I very recently joined your world of being employed by myself, which has been an interesting 2-3 months. So learning a lot, and yeah, I'm definitely going to pick your brains as a veteran in the space. But
100%.
yeah, so that's what I do, and it's been a lot of fun. It's I agree with you. It's such a good time to be in this space, and I hope it lasts long. But I do feel
Mm.
like we're in a good moment right now where not only is I feel like we're in a good moment right now because I think entrepreneurship has been and more people are going to self-enterprise, and we're going to see so many. It's like the easiest time, the most, I would say it's a very friendly time for startups and for
Hmm.
founders and people with entrepreneurial ambitions. And so we're going to see a lot of these startups coming up. And then at the same time, with Gen AI, we have a lot of tools to help us from like the content and the marketing side. And I think we're lucky to sit at a sweet spot at this moment in time. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think like this stuff, when it comes to content and branding and like everything that we spoke about today, my thesis is that like at least from the brands that I have worked with, I see that this is very often a very neglected part of a brand right now.
Right.
And unless you are the Duolingo of the world and whatnot,
Yeah.
but it's a very achievable goal. And actually, to your point, I also think like because now the market is getting much more competitive, both as a freelancer, as an entrepreneur, but also as brands.
Yeah.
Not having that voice personified, not having that tone of voice and that niche that you're capturing, the way that you're talking about with your users might be a very big differentiator, right? Like even on LinkedIn,
Yes.
like if you think about posting on LinkedIn, you might talk about the same insight, but you might come at it from very different ways. And I think that's what's going to keep your audience to yourself. If you have a voice and then you are okay with letting go of the others,
Yeah.
and then just like developing that voice and developing that personality over time, and content and that tone of voice plays such a big part in it.
Yeah, I so agree. I so agree. Yeah, yeah. And like hopefully, with the right kind of with the right tools and the right like resources, the cost of doing that
Yeah.
hopefully will like decrease and decrease. And so you don't need to have a Duolingo size budget to do that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, Ines, this has been like super fascinating. I think we often think of content in CRM as a side note, and we do like one-off experiments and
Yeah.
something to just like sort of fill the gaps. But I think what you've very well described is that creators treat content as the product itself, and like how we could be doing the same. I think like that same mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to know more about you, learn more about your work, what would be the best place for them to find you?
Substack and LinkedIn would be the
Okay,
two best places. Yes.
perfect. And I would also highly encourage, there's a great YouTube um, video on Ines presenting her thesis topic, which I didn't understand
Is there?
fully. Yeah, yeah, there's a very interesting one. I tried to listen to it. It was a bit more academic for me.
Oh wow.
Um, but I understood what you were talking about and the essence of it. Like, is education a privilege versus is it something that is defined by a group of people? So meritocracy, and I think you were talking about all of that.
Yes. Wow. That's embarrassing that I didn't know that was recorded.
But even more so, like the way I reached out to you, I think like that article that you wrote on in terms of like how you should think of your career in the time of AI
Yeah.
was amazing and great work.
Thank you so much.
I'll definitely encourage everyone to read that. It helped me a lot as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's an exciting time. Yeah, education is going to change. Careers are different as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, thank you so much, Karen. This is so much fun, and yeah, love what you're doing. I can't wait to check out Pushwall, the Emmy,
Yeah.
and everything else that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.